Okay, so good morning from Boston, everyone. My name is Rachel Gilbert, and I've been in touch with some of you as we've been leading up to this webinar. But for those of you that I haven't met yet, I'm a researcher based at Tufts University in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a program officer for the Food Prices for Nutrition project. We're really excited to have you all here this morning. We'll be talking about tracking the cost and affordability of healthy diets in Tanzania. This is a very exciting next stage of work that began about 6 years ago here in Tanzania, as well as in Ghana, with the Indicators of Affordability and Nutritious Diets in Africa project, or IANDA. We're really excited to have some IANDA collaborators here with us today to talk more about previous work and this most recent iteration of the project. That's the Food Prices for Nutrition project, both what's been done since the IANDA project and what we can do together in the future. So it's great to see some familiar names here. Before I hand things over to my colleagues, I'll just quickly go over a few little logistics. You just saw that I started the webinar recording. We will post the recording on our website along with the slides. And we'll also share them with all the participants right after the webinar with the email that you registered with and on our website. During the presentation, if people can just keep themselves muted and with their video off, that will help reduce bandwidth and some distractions. But we would love to hear from you directly and see your faces at the end. We'll have a discussion and a question and answer period. So if you can, feel free to turn on your video then. In the meantime, you can just introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to. Tell us your name and where you're joining from, and definitely share questions and comments there as we go. I'll try and respond to some of them as we're going through. And let's see. Yeah, with that, I guess I'll just hand it over to Dr. Fulgence Mishili, who is going to do some opening remarks. We will then have a presentation from Dr. Anna Herforth, who's the co-principal investigator on this project, with some closing remarks from Dr. Kinabo. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Fulgence.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Good morning to everyone, and good afternoon for the colleagues in Tanzania, probably in the Eastern Africa. Thank you so much for the project to give me this opportunity and honor to have a few words as remarks to open up this afternoon discussion. I won't take much of your time since I know there are many critical issues that they will be presented and probably to give more room for the people to discuss later. But personally, I'm so glad to see that this project is now taking place, particularly targeting Tanzania again in the issues related to the nutrition. Basically, this is the key. Probably Professor Kinabo will come and stress at the end. Nutrition issues, it has been a key now in most of the discussion of the food issues in Tanzania, particularly when we talk of the food security. Recently, I believe, currently, people, they are not only talking about the quantity of the food which is the population gets, but also people are now keen to understand the nutrients, how nutritious this food is. So as Rachel mentioned, we had a project, IANDA project, which was about 6 years, took place about 6 years ago, and we had a wonderful partnership and the stakeholders in Tanzania, including National Bureau of Statistics and others, basically, who joined together, and we work on developing the indicators which will help policymakers and others to make a good sense of what really is a nutritional diet in Tanzania. And I'm glad good job was done in that, and we came up with some result. But what we realized in that in that study, basically the issue related to food security in Tanzania, basically, the major factor of the diet cost is are the issues of seasonality. For some of us who are in Tanzania today, we can attest on that, the prices, for example, of the fruits now, they've really gone high. A few months ago, a few weeks ago, the price of mango was very low. The fruits, and particularly the fruit and vegetables from our result, indicated that they are really affected by the seasonality of prices, which means that they also will reflect in the diet of the people, what they eat, basically. Because if the prices goes higher, people will not afford to buy the food and the fruit and vegetable, which implies that their diet will not be as recommended. So I think it is very important. This particular study, which is ongoing now, the food price for nutritional in Tanzania, I think it's very important. And it is important for one big reason is to be able also to identify other key issues which can help us to find the ways of directing the policy that it can help us either to reduce the seasonality issues or to make sure that at least the prices during these seasonality effects will not be that much to make people unaffordable to afford the nutritional diet. So I think this is the right place. It's a right forum to discuss about this. I will contribute later in case it is needed, but I really give a big up to the team who is doing this study right now, and I'm ready to listen to what will be presented this afternoon. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you so
Rachel,
much.
to you.
Yeah, great. I'm actually going to hand it directly to Anna. Thanks so much, Fulgence. That was a really great way to open the webinar.
Yes, thank you very much, Fulgence. Thank you, Rachel and Joyce and everyone here. Hamjambo. Hope you are all doing fine, and thank you for joining. It's really nice to see some familiar names from working together, as Fulgence was recalling, and having a couple of workshops where I know many of you here today were involved in one or both of the workshops that we had in Dar es Salaam in 2016 and 2017 at the very start of this initiative. If you could go to the next slide, Rachel. I will be talking about the project and where we've come from, where we left off, and some developments since we left off talking together about 4 years ago. A lot has progressed, and we are now in this new phase of the project where we have a chance to, again, come back to working together on how to best use and apply food price information in Tanzania for understanding access to nutritious diets and how they vary by geography and by season, as Fulgence was highlighting, and what can be done about that at a policy and programmatic level to improve access to healthy diets, which is fundamentally about food security. I wanted to bring back this, the definition of food security used globally has been used by the UN since 1996. So 25 years, we've had this definition of and shared understanding of what we're striving for in ensuring food security. When all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to meet dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So Rachel, if you could advance 2 clicks. We have highlighted here these aspects to make sure are top of mind as we are thinking about the use of food prices for nutrition, that they illustrate some important aspects of physical and economic access, which has to do with availability and affordability of nutritious foods to meet dietary needs. So this is not just a matter of calories. It's not just a matter of staple grains. It's about meeting nutrient needs, meeting dietary patterns that are dignified and which are culturally expected and that protect health, both from immediate threats of nutrient deficiencies and also longer term threats of diet-related non-communicable disease, because this would satisfy, having enough food to meet dietary needs for an active and healthy life. So really, accountability to this goal of food security requires understanding availability and affordability of healthy diets. Next slide. So with that in mind, with this whole initiative, which started back in 2016 with IANDA, continued in a next phase called Kandasa, and now we're in this third phase of the Food Prices for Nutrition project. Our aims are to understand, in the case of Tanzania, if you went to a market in Tanzania, how much would it cost to obtain nutritious food to meet dietary needs? And how many people in the country can afford that cost or cannot afford that cost? Next slide. And so in this first phase, we started to wrap our heads around how to answer that question. In 2016, as some of you remember, we had a workshop in Dar es Salaam convening national and regional food price data stakeholders and end users. So some people who are here presented talking about how food price data is collected and what are the scopes and constraints of various kinds of food price data collected in Tanzania. Then we had a second workshop a year later where we had worked together to develop some indicators, which included some of the indicators I will talk about in depth today. And then in the following years, there was another phase of the project called Changing Access to Nutritious Diets in Africa and South Asia, Kandasa project, which was more focused on really developing the methodology, the detailed methodology, and sort of using these indicators with secondary data sets. We did not do workshops during this phase. It was more analytical phase. And next slide. And so now we're picking back up with how to apply the use of food price data at national level and in projects and with other users in the country who may be interested in using these indicators. So we left off from these workshops where we had talked about and learned about sources of food price data, the metrics themselves, and then possible applications of the metrics for policy and programs and research. So I'll go through these three pieces. Next slide. We have in these workshops in the beginning, we have heard from some of the food price data collectors that really helped me to understand what are the characteristics of each kind of food price data and how it could be used potentially for understanding access to nutritious diets. We heard about the market information systems, which are usually present in most countries in various forms. And in Tanzania, learned about this being formerly a function of the Ministry of Agriculture, and then that had been taken up by the Ministry of Industry and Trade, and that these, in general, market information systems have various kinds of price data on basic commodities and do not usually cover processed foods. And they also are pretty diverse in the coverage and the frequency of data that's collected. We also heard about some commodity-specific food price monitoring systems. So two of the ones were discussed included the East Africa Grain Council. And I know that we have the representative Sharifa Chikaha from that organization. We also heard about the TAHA, the Tanzanian, actually I'm gonna forget the acronym in its entirety. I'm sure people here know it, the Horticultural Association, which focuses on the prices of fruits and vegetables. And then we also have a third type of data that's collected, for example, by the World Food Program of early warning systems to guide interventions and sort of emergency food aid, for example. And these usually focus on the prices of staple foods, basic foods at markets in vulnerable areas. They usually have rapid availability, but few foods. So these three systems covered in the top part of this slide, we learned about, and they may be useful supplementary information. But what we discovered in this discussion and conversation is that really the main source of data for understanding food prices for nutrition on a regular basis will be coming from the data that are collected by the National Bureau of Statistics, which is responsible for collecting food price data to inform the Consumer Price Index and covers the prices of frequently consumed products collected monthly in various markets with a standard methodology. There's another source of food price data which we have used for global analysis, which is a unique data set coming from the World Bank International Comparison Program, which has food price data from most countries in the world. And the purpose of it is to be able to compare prices around the world. So we applied the metrics using this data set to get an estimate of the cost of healthy diets globally, in each country globally, and the number of people who could not afford them. The data set has a limitation that it doesn't include all the products that may be important in each individual country, because it includes products that are common across several countries. And it also has only just one annual average price, and it's not high frequency at all. Right now, it's only one price every few years. So the most recent data set was a annual average for 2017. So ideally, the CPI data can be used for more frequent monitoring, that the global data set is really not a substitute for the national data. Next slide. And so what we had heard from the NBS representatives when we met were that the NBS collects the national official statistics, and the price data collected are used for measuring inflation. Prices for 98 food items are collected on a monthly basis at representative market locations in all 25 regions of the country. And the CPI is weighted by the share of total expenditures. So generally, all items that are commonly consumed in major proportions are included in this system. And so it's used to monitor the movement of food prices in the country, and also used to give insights into food security. Next slide. So with that aim of using the data to understand food security, I want to share updates on what's happened in the last few years since we last came together. That the cost and affordability of a healthy diet, which was one of the initial indicators, has been now taken up globally to understand food access or food security. It's been reported in the last 2 years of the UN State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World reports, joining other food security metrics that have been reported. by the FAO and other UN partners. So you can see in the graphics, the 3 indicators of food security, where undernourishment, or the prevalence of undernourishment, has been reported for decades in this publication, which is really just an estimate of the number of people who cannot access adequate dietary energy or calories. And that estimate is 690 million compared to 2 billion who report an experience of food insecurity using the food insecurity experience scale, which has questions such as, did you worry about running out of food? To understand, people's actual concern and experience of being food insecure. And then we add to this the unaffordability of healthy diets, which are required for food security. So we found 3 billion people cannot afford nutritious food to meet dietary needs, as shown by the cost of healthy diet indicator. Next slide. And we can see here that the majority of people who cannot afford a healthy diet in the marketplace are located in Africa and South Asia, where in both regions, the majority of the population does not have sufficient income to purchase the least cost healthy diet in the marketplace, according to the this World Bank International Comparison Program data set that we used to look at all countries. Next slide. So going back into the metrics and how we actually calculate this cost of a healthy diet, it's operationalized as a recommended diet. You may remember it has also been called CORD, or the cost of recommended diet, because it's based on quantitative food-based dietary guidelines. And we have looked across food-based dietary guidelines that many countries have published. They're available for about 100 countries. I know Tanzania is in the process of developing them, led by Professor Kinabo. And maybe we will be able to discuss where that process is and how they could be applied here. But only some of these dietary guidelines are quantitative. Next slide. So we applied guidelines that are quantitative. For example, this is the Benin dietary guidelines, and you can see that it has it's identified food groups, and within each food group, identified the number of portions of each food group required per day, and then also the amount of each food that would constitute a portion. So this information allows us to calculate what it actually costs to meet this guideline using various different foods, categorizing the foods into each food group, and then just adding up what the cost is of the recommended amounts of each food group. Next slide. So these are the steps. They're actually pretty straightforward. The hardest part is probably organizing the original data set. And once it is completely organized in standard units, the steps to calculating the cost of healthy diet are straightforward. So it involves categorizing each food according to the food groups in the dietary guideline that's being applied, removing items that are not required for a healthy diet, such as sweets, and removing duplicate items. Like if there's 2 different kinds of rice, the cheapest one would be kept. And then calculating the price per day for each item, which is the recommended quantity to meet the recommendation. And then once that's done, looking across the list of foods and selecting the 1 to 3 lowest cost items in each food group and summing the cost of all food groups. Next slide. So when we did this for the SOFI report, the Global UN report, we looked at many different guidelines, and we actually calculated the cost of meeting each of these guidelines in diverse nations around the world. Next slide. And one of the bottom lines is that it almost doesn't matter which guideline is chosen because they're all far more expensive than poverty lines and than many people can afford. And they have kind of similar ranges of prices. Even though the guidelines have some differences, their cost ends up being quite similar, and showing that healthy diets by any definition are far more expensive, again, than the total poverty line, which is $1.90 if looking at the international poverty line, or the portion of that poverty line that could be credibly reserved for food because people have to buy other things like housing and transportation in addition to food. So $1.20 is kind of the maximum that could be expected for food. And so clearly the cost of healthy diets is far more than that, no matter which set of dietary guidelines you choose. And what we did was take the median across 10 guidelines, which turned out to be about $3.50 in international dollars as the cost of a healthy diet. Next slide. And then we looked at affordability, which is the comparison of the cost to a defined income standard. And this can be done either by looking at the comparison of the cost to poverty lines, which we just saw in the last slide using the international poverty line. It can also be done with the national poverty line, which is often different and somewhat higher. It can be done with comparison to food expenditures that are typical, or comparison to income or wages. Next slide. So here are a couple different ways that we looked at affordability. In the top map, you can see the cost of the healthy diet in comparison to average national food expenditures per capita. So what people are usually reporting that they spend on food. And this is through, looking at expenditure data. And you can see Tanzania there, the cost of a healthy diet is on the order of between 1 and 2 times as much as people usually would be spending on food. So it's relatively expensive compared to what people usually buy. And then the bottom map, you can see, this is again the same map we saw earlier of the percent of the population who cannot afford a healthy diet, even the lowest cost food items. Next slide. And I want to highlight here that we're talking about least cost diets. So these are the most affordable combination of foods that meet the criteria of the dietary guidelines. This means that there's no standard food basket in terms of items, that the food items included would depend on what happens to be cheapest in each time and place. So for example, in one season, mangoes might be the cheapest fruit, but in another season, they're definitely not the cheapest fruit. Maybe oranges are the cheapest fruit. And so depending on the time that the food prices are collected, the cheapest items are going to be those that are included in the healthy diet basket. So next slide. This provides a conservative estimate, a lower bound on the cost per day that's needed. And if you were to consider preferences or convenience, that would just add to the cost. Next slide. We think of this as a ladder of affordability, where the first step is just short-term subsistence and calorie adequacy, which is what, those in the deepest poverty might be struggling to achieve. And followed by the cost of meeting just nutrient needs and avoiding deficiencies or excesses. And then meeting the cost of the healthy diet, which is not only about nutrients, it meets nutrient needs, but also it meets food group recommendations and balanced proportions for a normal kind of dignified diet that also protects health for the long term. And then other goals such as convenience or preferences, preferring to eat maize rather than sorghum, for example, would change the cost and make it a bit higher. And so we think about this to understand that when diets are affordable, food prices are just one of many influences on food choice, because you could prefer food items which are more expensive than the minimum. But when healthy diets are unaffordable, food prices are really an insurmountable barrier to improving diet quality. And that's why we look at the least cost floor, because we want to understand, how many people, no matter how much behavior change they're exposed to, they're just not going to be able to change their behavior because they cannot afford to follow the recommendations that are being communicated. Next slide. Yeah, so again, the calorie adequacy has been used for years and kind of mistaken for full food security. We're not talking about calories as food security and then nutrition as something else. Again, this is not food security, it's just short-term subsistence. Next. The nutrient adequacy benchmark is useful for intervention planning, such as fortification planning. It's been used by the World Food Program and the Fill the Nutrient Gap programs. Next, please. But it's still not complete for the bare minimum for food security, which is meeting, dietary needs in complete form. Food-based dietary guidelines are meant for everyone, not just those who are wealthy. And next. And there's also, there's kind of a question of whether maybe some of these other goals are actually also the best way to set a target for food security as well, since food security does involve preferences and dignified diets, and poverty lines have actually long been set using some information on food preferences. Next slide. So we calculated all of these least cost diets, the energy sufficient diet being the minimum cost to meet energy requirements using the least expensive available starchy staple food, the nutrient adequate diet being the minimum cost to meet energy and nutrient requirements for 23 macro and micronutrients, both the upper and lower bounds to stay within the healthy limits. And then the healthy diets, which I've explained based on food-based dietary guidelines, which is designed to be a behaviorally realistic way to meet nutrient needs and other needs, including proportionality, norms, culture, and protection of health. And then the healthy diet, including food preferences, which would be not only the least cost items, but also using expenditure shares of the poor within food groups. Next slide. So on the last indicator, we have looked at the potential to use healthy diets also for poverty line determination, using them to construct poverty lines and safety nets around the basic need of the cost of a healthy diet, because currently basic needs has not usually been understood to include the healthy diet. So you can see this example from Myanmar, where the food poverty line in the middle pie chart, you can see that's based on actual expenditure shares of the poor who are not consuming a healthy diet. The starchy staple share is 72% of energy, and the nutrient dense food groups are a very low proportion of energy. Compared to the healthy diet, where you can see the share of starchy staples goes down and the nutrient dense food group share goes up to meet minimum food-based dietary guideline recommendations. So if we also, we could look at the healthy diet in two ways, either the least cost items or a combination of items which are slightly more preferred. So again, in Myanmar, rice is preferred over maize. So that would be the item chosen for starchy staples. For the protein-rich foods, fish would be chosen rather than pulses. So this you can see in the graph that it makes a difference to where the poverty line would be set, whether you use the standard basket, which does not meet nutrient or dietary needs, or the healthy diet least cost basket, which coincidentally turns out to be similarly have a similar cost in Myanmar, or the healthy diet with food preferences where the cost goes up, but it might be a more realistic situation for a healthy diet that people would want to eat and can, where food safety nets need to provide assistance for people to afford that. Next slide. I wanted to share this news from 2 days ago, where here in the United States, we just had this news come out that our National Food Assistance Program, the largest safety net, which is food stamps, have revised their determination of benefits based essentially on the cost of a recommended diet accounting for food preferences. So very similar to what we showed in the last slide from the Myanmar example. And this has been something that people have critiqued for decades, really, that this food benefit was not in line with the current dietary guidelines and it was too low. It also had been ignoring preparation time, assuming that low-income people would be buying dried beans and soaking them, which takes many hours. But people generally do not do that and buy canned beans instead, which are slightly more expensive. So the determination of the benefit included some of that preparation time as well as the dietary guidelines. And President Biden had urged the Department of Agriculture to review this so that the benefits reflect the true cost of a basic healthy diet. So this is a really nice example that we just saw here, where the safety net has been based on the cost of a healthy diet, which coincidentally here, it just turns out to be about $6.90 per day. And that's very similar to what we would have estimated in the US for a least cost healthy diet that reflects also food preferences. Next slide. So I just briefly wanted to touch on the Nutritious Food Price Index, which is another indicator we had discussed when we met a few years ago, as something that would be a companion to the food CPI, which essentially uses the same foods in the food CPI data collection. But instead of weighting by expenditure share, which is what CPIs do, it would be aligned with the cost of a healthy diet. So the NPI would be the form of the cost of a healthy diet indicator, which is the unit free index, which is something that could accompany the CPI. So what that would do is re-weight the same food items by the amounts recommended per day, rather than simply by how much people spend. So in the CPI, we know if people buy more Coca-Cola, it's going to have a larger share in the CPI. But in the NPI, that wouldn't happen because Coca-Cola is not recommended in dietary guidelines. So it would hold constant the weights for more nutritious items. And within food groups, it would weight those vegetables, for example, which are more highly consumed, such as in the vegetable group, Sukuma wiki would probably get a high weight because it's relatively more consumed than others. And it would just be a different way of constructing a price index to reflect healthy diets. Next slide. So we have done some applications in Tanzania. There's many more that could be done. And next slide. This gives an example of the use of NBS data to show the cost of a healthy diet across regions. And we can see here there's quite a bit of regional variation in the cost of healthy diets. We used the food prices for 71 items, excluding those which wouldn't be required, and finding that the national average cost of the healthy diet was around $2.33 in US dollars. And I apologize that we don't actually have that in local currency because we had converted it to international dollars, but that would have been, it would have gone up a bit since that was based in 2011 dollars. But you can see here the relative cost, and that the diets are higher in some regions, up to 35% more expensive than the average cost in the Southwest, which is where it was, where the cost of the diet was less expensive. And in a lot of cases, vegetable prices are driving the high costs, contributing about a third of the total diet cost. But in the next slide, we can see a little more nuance because we can look at the variation in the cost of different food groups, looking at starchy staples, protein-rich foods, dairy, fruits, vegetables, and oils. There was kind of some strikingly high oil prices, which we were not sure if was just a price spike or whether that was something more consistent, and that was driving the cost, the high cost in certain northern regions. And then you can see the vegetables having a high cost in the southeast of the country in this time period. I'm sure there's a lot more we could discuss on this, but it gives an example, an illustration of what can be done with food price data. Next slide. Yan Bai, who is here, who's been a collaborator on this project since the beginning, has done a lot of work on seasonality in the variation of diet costs in Tanzania and in other countries. This gives an illustration of the seasonality in the least cost nutrient adequate diet in Tanzania. There's significant seasonality for 12 of the 21 regions, and fruits and vegetables had stronger seasonality than other food groups. Whereas in contrast, animal source foods had the lowest seasonality. And this we would probably expect. There are probably a lot of food system reasons for this: perishability, transport, all issues that would be really appropriate for policy discussion. And just having this information sort of brings people's attention to the challenges that people may face in consistently accessing healthy diets. The peak cost was found around 3 months before the harvest in May. And there's, I want to share the full paper of these results if anyone wants to dig into the details. I put it in the chat box. And next slide. So something to think about and that'd be great to discuss today is how to use these metrics in policy dialogue. For example, you know, what proportion of people cannot afford a healthy diet can be used in dialogue and planning around food security and poverty lines. Having a food price index simply aligned with what people actually need to eat is the motivation for having the NPI as a companion to the food CPI. And then we can look at food group specific unaffordability or inflation or price spikes, which may point to the need for investment in agriculture or in trade or both. It can highlight specific needs for social protection, which in an agricultural setting might imply assistance with homestead food production, as well as cash transfers. You know, if people cannot afford to purchase items in the market, there may be other ways that are needed to support food access. And these interventions and discussions may be very regionally specific. Next slide. This is an example of looking at the change in price over time of different food groups. This one comes from Ethiopia. And this graph is just showing the inflation of different food groups and illustrating that pulses increased much faster than starchy staples, which had the lowest growth. Fruits and vegetables also increased faster. So this is highlighting the relative change in prices over time and the need for attention to nutrient-rich food groups to make sure people can access healthy diets. Next slide. So bringing us back to, again, where we left off in 2017, there had been interest in regularly monitoring the cost of the healthy diet, which at the time we referred to as CORD, the cost of a recommended diet, and the Nutritious Food Price Index, or the NPI. There had been interest voiced in comparing the cost of a healthy diet to the cost of just calorie adequacy to see what people are struggling, that gap between just surviving and actually getting a healthy diet. And also there's the decision and discussion that NBS data would be the best data source for this kind of monitoring. That the collection of food price data is the national statistic belonging to the NBS scope, and the scope should respond to the demand for more nutrition sensitivity in food systems. So these metrics can help with that demand. And we also discussed some applications, such as in the Ministry of Agriculture, having a role in monitoring food security, but that's been missing. The nutrition sensitivity has been, many institutions globally have been focusing more on calories than complete diets. So these can help to turn towards nutrition sensitive food systems. Also for targeting social protection, some people brought up informing planners of school feeding programs to choose low cost nutritious foods. Also, we heard about using this information in nutrition curricula for realistic behavior change communication, and also using the data to inform producers of the potential for business opportunities. And this is where, food security and profitability can actually go hand in hand, where there's a need and there can be greater attention to neglected crops. Next slide. So the next steps that we can share where we are on the food prices for nutrition side and what we might be able to do together for implementing monitoring of the cost of a healthy diet. We have these three main priorities of supporting the use of the new metrics in high priority countries, of which Tanzania is one of 9. Building a global system also to use these indicators in the global dialogue and be able to monitor change in food prices for nutrition. And then doing analytical work on the change in cost and affordability of healthy diets. And this involves 3 institutions as project partners, Tufts, and Tufts is located in Boston in the US, the World Bank, and also IFPRI as collaborators towards these 3 aims. And ultimately, we want these food price data to be used to guide agricultural production and food markets for improved nutrition. Next slide. Briefly, you may have experienced or participated in other initiatives on using food prices related to the cost of diets. And just to kind of say how this is different and builds on what has been done in the past, our emphasis here is really on monitoring and streamlining, using these indicators regularly in monitoring systems. So the cost of a healthy diet had been specifically designed to be quite easy to calculate so that it would be feasible to incorporate into existing systems. And it's focused on leveraging the abundance of data already collected. So supporting countries, including Tanzanian data collectors, to calculate the metrics within data systems that already exist, not new data collection systems. So other initiatives have focused more on other aspects. The World Food Program Fill the Nutrient Gap focuses so far on the cost of meeting nutrient needs to design interventions and fortification. Like it says, how to fill the nutrient gap, using the metric that has been called the cost of the diet, which is a fairly non-specific name, but it actually refers to nutrient adequacy and not the full healthy diet meeting guidelines. So what we're doing now is moving beyond only nutrients to look at complete healthy diet patterns. We don't rely on linear programming, so it's relatively easy to incorporate. The cost of the diet approach to look at nutrient adequacy is quite labor intensive and requires a lot of data and linear programming to compute. So it's not so easy to include in monitoring. And also, you know, we're trying to do something that is aligned with food-based dietary guidelines. And we're also collaborating with World Food Program to add this metric to their regular work alongside the nutrient-based metrics they have been using. Next slide. So we have some tools under construction right now that hopefully in next steps, next year, we will be able to work together actually implementing these. And we're creating an Excel searchable spreadsheet of food item quantities for calculating the cost of a healthy diet. So we will be including the Tanzania NBS items and showing which food group each of those items belongs in, how much of each of those items as that would be purchased in the market would satisfy food-based dietary guidelines. So for example, if you wanted, if you were going to meet the fruit requirement with watermelon, how many kilograms of watermelon would you need to go purchase, accounting for the edible portion and the amount that's recommended? That's a different amount purchased than the amount of grapes to satisfy dietary guidelines. So this searchable spreadsheet database will be useful because it simplifies the task of identifying least cost items in the proportions that people actually eat. And along with this, we're working on a user guide for calculating the cost of a healthy diet. Next slide. We're also planning in the initial stages the Food Prices for Nutrition e-learning course, which Yanbai will be leading as part of the World Bank team. This will be hosted on the World Bank's Open Learning Campus platform about a year from now. And it will be a 3-hour self-paced course for anyone who would be interested in using these metrics. This is not going to be the only way of engagement, just to be clear that we can also work much more directly, but this will be available globally for anyone who wants to learn about the metrics. Next slide. So before I finish, I just want to make sure to thank our generous donors, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UK Aid through the FCDO. And they've been funders for several years and have really allowed us to scale up this work. So we're very grateful for that support. And I would like to, in the next slide, I'd like to invite Dr. Joyce Kinabo to reflect on the progress that's been made and what she sees as next steps and any other reflections, and then we will go into discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Anna, for that excellent presentation. I think you have said it all. The very limited that I can add to this excellent presentation. But I would like to reflect a bit on the definition of food security that you presented at the beginning of your presentation. Obviously, it talks about accessibility, and accessibility in this case is about economic accessibility to food. And now you have clearly shown that economic access to food is actually determined by price. And this is what it's all about, this affordability of food. So I guess it's high time we look at the definition of food security again and see whether we could add some few words to reflect what is actually happening currently in terms of how people really get what they need to eat and be able to eat that. So I think this is something that is very clear, that accessibility is economic, and if it's about economic, price is one of the items that will determine what people can be able to consume at any given time or season. But also I've mentioned about health diet, and I think the issue of healthy diet, sometimes we leave it blank, and we haven't actually been able to say, okay, when we talk of a healthy diet, what are the food items? What is the composition of that health diet? And I thought it's high time that we try to define this or describe in terms of localities, as you have clearly shown that the affordability and the cost of diet tend to vary depending on geophysical position or location. So how can we actually be able to determine the kind of diet that would be suitable in a given location? And how do we replace some of the food items that tend to be highly seasonal? You've mentioned about vegetables and fruits being highly seasonal, but how can we replace those so that we are able to maintain the same composition throughout the year? Should we replace with dried fruits or dried vegetables, or what other food items that can be used to actually replace those that are becoming more expensive? Or probably we need to understand what are the kind of actions that people take to replace some of these food items in their daily expenditure on food. In terms of policy, I think it's something that we need to also start thinking around that area. How can we use this information to inform policy? You've mentioned about social protection, and I think it's high time for us to advise organizations such as TASAF to see how best to organize their package so that at the end of the day, those beneficiaries that are getting money from TASAF are able to actually consume a healthy diet, the way you have shown that what US has done so far. And then probably we need to go a little bit more with the information that we have at the moment. How can we link this aspect of cost of diet and stunting and food security? Because the way you have shown the pattern of cost of milk or cost of oil or whatever tends to vary from one area to another. But we're also seeing a similar pattern of malnutrition. Like one of the slides you showed that cost of diet in Mbeya, Iringa, and Njombe, Ruvuma is lower compared to Lindi and other regions. But these are the areas where we see high rates of stunting. So how can we link these aspects so that we are able to really make good use of the information that we have around to improve nutrition at the end of the day? And we're talking about tracking. I think this is about tracking expenditure, or tracking, I don't know what's the title now again, tracking the cost of and affordability of health diet. The way we buy food, we don't have any kind of evidence that can be used actually to show how much a household is able to spend on food. And I was thinking, like, if we use things like e-physical device, the EFD, in the process of buying food, I think it will help us to really see how households spend their income on food and be able to track whether they are really accessing nutritious diets or not. Another issue was on data, that we have limited data, but price data you have shown is available, but how can we harmonize that information so that we have one package of data that can be accessed by anybody at any time to be able to use it to really assess food and nutrition security, as well as cost of diet at the end of the day. I don't want to take much time because I think we need to hear from others. It has been a very rich presentation. So I'll stop here for now, and then I'll probably be able to add more at my closing remarks. Thank you for now. Back to you, Rachel.
Yeah, hi everyone. Anna, did you want to lead us into the discussion a little bit? I think we have 15 minutes or so left. We'd love to hear if people have questions, or I guess we have these areas for discussion. So if people have questions, feel free to turn on your video or not. You can put it in the chat or just let us know what questions you have. But we'd also love to hear from you if you have ideas about using these metrics in Tanzania, which stakeholders might be interested, or opportunities for incorporating the metrics that we've just been talking about, particularly the cost of a healthy diet, into routine monitoring, particularly what things you think are needed or what next steps we might take and work on together. So yeah, please feel free to share any questions or thoughts. And thank you very much, Joyce, for your remarks.
Yes, thanks, Rachel, and thank you, Professor Kinabo, for you have a uniquely broad perspective on food systems and nutrition throughout Tanzania in all of your work. So we really appreciate your insights and the questions that you have posed. So along with the questions that Rachel shared here on opportunities for using the metric, which echo some of what Joyce was saying, I think she raised some other questions as well, which may be of interest. So I see, I'll turn it over to Rachel to manage, but I think right away we see a hand raised from Mr.
please.
Obey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for linking up again on this. I think I have a lot, not a lot, a number of questions and my advice moving forward. I have not really seen this information, good information, being used during the discussions of the food systems dialogues which have been going on in Tanzania, and I don't know, maybe globally. I don't know how this indicator of cost and affordability, which you said has been adopted by UN, has it been the part of the action track 1 of the food system dialogue, and maybe this has contributed in a way to do that. The second thing I would like to see, because I saw like in Tanzania, how are the vegetable prices are driving the cost of the health diet. And I'm seeing also the seasonality being really issue. I think there is, do you think there is really that correlation between that, that seasonality also contributing to that? And the other thing I saw really is worrisome statistics. If I got them right, you see close to 9 million, Africans cannot purchase health diets. And if I take the total population of Africa, which is around 1.216 billion people by 2016, that is close to 73%. And this is really something very, very serious, and it's a big problem which maybe we have not talked enough to show how big this problem is. And the issue of purchasing, given our model, when people they do for themselves, they farm for themselves, and is the issue of consumption, purchasing, or what? I don't know. I think it's a very, very high number. Now, in terms of the way forward, like using this metric, I think the opportunities are there. Now we are in the process of formulating a national sector nutrition action plan, and it is taking the system approach. And the issue of food system and diets are becoming really important to build the blocks for the coming MNAP2. So I think it's really the time to look at how can this be part of discussions which are ongoing in this formulation, but also to look at how, of course, we have been engaging NBS, and NBS is now a lot of formulating some new strategies for master plans for coming statistical master plans. So how can those be part of discussions moving forward? So let me stop here for now for others to continue talking as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. Really important points, all of these three. I'd like to respond to the first three and then leave the fourth for further discussion, because I think everyone here has a better idea of how we can work together and how NBS can also be engaged moving forward, and including these considerations in the national plan. So the first issue you had brought up is the use of these metrics in the food systems dialogue and the UN Food Systems Summit. And it is there's so much. I think it's hard for me anyway to keep track of what all is being discussed in the Food Systems Summit, but I can offer a couple of pieces of information. One is that we've been working together also with Nigeria, which is another of the 9 high priority countries for this work. And the Ministry of Agriculture in Nigeria, as well as FAO, have committed to working together on a national food systems dashboard for Nigeria, which includes the cost of a healthy diet as a routine statistic. So that's under construction and specifically being designed for inclusion in the discussions towards the Food Systems Summit. And the intention is that this would be a way to track the cost of a healthy diet using the Nigeria National Statistical Organization prices, which would be analogous to NBS. And so that's one model, which is a possibility to look at, how they're doing that and whether that could be a system that might be appropriate in Tanzania, or if there's a different kind of system. Also, thanks, Rachel, for posting the UN Food Systems Summit information that's on our website. Our team has been engaged, and I think that the cost and affordability of healthy diets is definitely an indicator that is, now it's generally out there in the dialogue, especially due to its inclusion in the UN reports. But I think, it's hard, again, it's been hard to say sort of what's rising to the top of all of the priorities that are being discussed. I do think that that's an indicator that will come out as something that's actionable and monitorable over the next 10 years of the, monitoring towards food systems dialogue goals. The second point about the vegetables driving cost, I think, is a really interesting point. And I would point out, that it'd be interesting to look at this more with the more recent data from NBS as well, and considering also whether the list includes some of the most affordable vegetables. I did my dissertation work on traditional leafy vegetables in Tanzania. And so I don't know if all of the ones, the mchicha and the nightshades, and if they're really all included in there, and they may be some more affordable vegetables, although the NBS list, I think, is pretty comprehensive, and it might be interesting to look at that. I totally agree with your reflection of the shocking statistic of the high proportion, above 70%, who cannot afford healthy diets in the marketplace, and that it has not been talked about, of how big of a problem that is. I think the history of nutrition has focused on behavior change as a mechanism for trying to improve diets. And we really need to evolve into, collaboration with food systems actors, because when you have that many people who can't afford healthy diets in the marketplace, no amount of behavior change is going to change that situation. It has to come also from food system change. But also, as you were indicating, that the market is not the only place to access food. So attention also to home production and even wild collection of certain foods that may be too expensive in certain seasons, and how to help people make ends meet while also seeking to transform food systems to make things like vegetables generally more affordable. So I would welcome your further thoughts and reflections, and also those from anyone else, especially in Mr. Obe's last question on how to have this be a part of discussions moving forward, especially in the, I believe you said that it was the MNEP2. I didn't get the full name of the plan, and maybe you can type it into the chat box so that we're fully aware of, the nature of what's being discussed. And so I'd like to ask if anyone else who's participating has further thoughts on Mr. Obe's question of how to include this in discussions going forward. Thank you. The National Multisectoral Nutrition Action Plan. Exactly. Yeah, what is the timeline for that action plan? Because it does seem like a perfectly appropriate place for this kind of indicator to be included.
We are now really trying to compile the different work streams which people have been working together. So the time is now, because by October the plan should be out. So I think if there is anything to do, it's now. And the good thing is coordinated by TFNC, and the chair of the board of TFNC is in this call. So she can help us moving forward. No, I didn't mention a name. I said chair. So if she's there, so.
Yeah, and Joyce, did you want to say something? Because I see your hand there.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. Am I still muted? Okay. I'm looking at this way forward here. That how can we continue to use this information? The thing is, sometimes when we do these things, coming up with indices and all that, we seem to like package them in a way that can only be accessed by very few people or sectors or organizations. I think at the end of the day, this kind of information should actually go down to consumers, because these are the people who are facing the costs, are paying for the food items. How can we make them aware of the cost of a healthy diet, and therefore guide them to really make decision and budgeting at household level? I think we need to move down a little bit to involve consumers, so that at the end of the day, what we establish is in an index or indices are actually applied by consumers, so that they can be able to afford this nutritious diets. Because for now, obviously, we are in the process of coming up with this and perfecting all the calculations and all that. But how can we package it in a way that is simple, straightforward for everybody else to understand and be able to use that information to really be able to access affordable diets? At the end of the day, the consumer is the most important stakeholder in this area. But again, even budgeting at national level, I think is something that can be used. This information is very useful. Even for setting up minimum wage, how can we include nutrition considerations in setting up minimum wage by the ministry or even private sector, so that people can afford really to access foods that would provide them with the kind of nutrients that they need. So I see a lot of areas where we can move in and help in terms of informing or advising these people to really take up this information and use it for the benefit of the consumers, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are important as far as this work is concerned, and the information that we're getting here is concerned. But we keep talking about food systems. How can we use this kind of data or information to inform the entire food system at the end of the day, the food environment and all that? Because when I look at the data that is collected by NBS, some of the foods, I think a greater proportion of the foods that are included in the list are actually ultra-processed foods and very few minimal processed foods. And the rest, like fruits and vegetables, they don't feature much in the list of the food items that NBS, until I think 2016 when we started this project. So again, we still need to continue to convince NBS to include more food items in the list that can be tracked as far as price is concerned. But we are looking at also the surveys that have been done, like the nutrition surveys, the DHS. I think it's an area where we could actually introduce this, so that at the end of the day, we have maps and information that links up what is affordable and the kind of situation that is existing in various locations or regions in this country. So I think these are issues that we could actually try to negotiate with the organizers or organizations that are doing this DHS or nutrition surveys, so that information about food prices is actually collected, and then we use that to determine the cost of health diet. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. And I know Tumaini has a hand up, and we'll go to that next, but just to respond to a couple of your points, I think that the most immediate concern is how to have this metric taken up by NBS, because the first step towards anyone using it would be calculating it in Tanzania, because there's a limited amount that we can do, you know, without as outsiders. The data we have access to is older. Really, it needs to be something that's taken up internally in the country before it can be made useful to any stakeholder, whether it be food system stakeholders or consumers or anyone else. So I think that's a priority, is maybe going back to the National Multi-Sectoral Nutrition Action Plan and how it could be incorporated so that it can then reach other stakeholder groups. And the DHS, to offer some information, they won't be collecting any food prices. And I think that's fine, because we have a very nice system of food price data collection with the NBS. And other people could, you know, researchers can also use this in their own food price data. But DHS is going to be implementing a new module on diet quality for women, which Joyce, you know, because you've actually been involved in helping to make sure those questions are the right questions. And I'm leading the design of that diet quality module for the DHS, with input from Joyce and from others at TFNC and from Fulgence as well, who gave some input into that. So that is actually, as Obe mentioned, it's underway. So we should be able to soon have some information about diets to be able to relate to information on affordability. So that's an update.
Tumaini, did you want to ask your question or share your comment? And then Rose, I think, after that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. And let me welcome Anna and Rachel again back to Tanzania. And it has been a while since we met. I think it was 2017, I remember. And it's about 4 years now. And we are kind of starting forgetting this good work that you did in Tanzania. Perhaps I would want to ask one question and then provide some opportunities where this information and methods can be used. So regarding the question, I would want to know more about the when you talked about the composition of the health diet that you costed, if that also considered the age category and the issue of gender, especially knowing that men and the women have different nutrition needs, and their healthy diet that would fit one group might not perhaps fit the other group. So I just want to know if those were some of the considerations that you put into coming up with this health diet. In terms of opportunities for using this information, but also incorporating some of the recommendations into the current system, I would wish if we could think about high-level advocacy, where we can engage high-level agriculture, food security, but also the private sector, so that we can be able to understand what does this mean to them in terms of planning, in terms of policies, but also in terms of budget and what they're supposed to be doing for them to be able to kind of take this up. Because I know for sure, like if we get to engage the private sector, that is in agriculture sector, and they understand these kind of healthier foods that we are talking about, I think that could quickly promote the production of this particular food items. And perhaps that also could address the issue of seasonality, which we see might affect also the availability of this healthy diet. So I think that's an open opportunity that we can engage ourselves and be able to kind of keep this ball rolling. I also know that for the moment, the agriculture sector is actually revamping the extension service. And this will be the people that are going to be down there to support production, but also to promote consumption of such healthy diets. And it could also be a good opportunity if we could try to see how this kind of group could be engaged and informed about this important information which we just shared today. And on the same opportunity also, I know we have the market monitors that scattered all over the country, and these are the ones that do collect the food prices and they report to the government. And I think Aspires, my colleague from the agriculture section, not here, but they were planning something to kind of a training to update them on some key indicators and the information that they might need to consider in terms of collecting and reporting. Yeah, so I guess this also could be an opportunity where we could try to see how we could integrate this information into their training so that they're informed on what to on additional information that they should be collecting and on additional products that we want them to be routinely collected. Yeah, so I thought maybe those kind of 3-4 opportunities would be important if we were to move it and make it happen. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Just really quickly, I think since we're getting close to 9:30, maybe we can have Rose share her comment and question. And then, of course, if people need to leave, they can feel free to do so. And if we can follow up with people afterwards, or we can stay on for a little bit for those of us who have extra time. But thanks for those comments and that question, Tumaini. Rose, if you want to just quickly share your comment or question, that'd be great. Then we can respond.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, Joyce, and Anna for this insightful report you have shared. It's very interesting to hear what is happening and what is on the ground. My only comment is that while we are talking about where we are thinking about health diets and its cost, to make sure that there's a health diet on the table, majority of the people even up to now, especially in the last few years, they are still struggling to get even the basic food to fill their tummy. So while it's useful really to think of the cost of health diet and make advocacy on that so that people can change their habits, is something which we also need to consider or to think about. How do we make sure that people even get the basic food to fill their tummies, let alone the health diets? Because people are still struggling a lot to make sure that they have at least 1 meal a day for the majority of the people in the urbans, even in rural areas. So those are some of the things which we also need to factor in as we continue discussing this insightful report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment, Rose. And I think you are highlighting why this needs policy action and not just behavior change, because, you know, if people are struggling just to get enough calories for the day, they cannot contemplate a healthy diet, no matter what they're told about how to prioritize budgets. So this is definitely a food systems issue. And I didn't present it, but we have used at least the World Bank data to calculate the cost of just meeting energy needs, which is quite a lot lower. It's like about 5 times lower than the cost of a healthy diet, but still, as you say, some people struggle with that. And this has probably gotten worse due to COVID. The priorities that and the opportunities that Tumaini mentioned, I think are all really important, and definitely I would love to keep engaging on how to do that, how to engage the private sector and agriculture sector, how to engage the extension service of Ministry of Agriculture, and how to engage the training of market monitors for starting to include this information. Because I think, you know, relative to Rose's point, we can't, you know, what gets measured gets managed, right? So if we're not measuring people's access to calories and then people's access to healthy diets, then we can't start to manage how to improve that situation. A quick answer to Tumaini's question on the composition, it actually just uses the average needs for the population, because dietary guidelines are written for the entire population. There's no age and gender specific guidance in the guidelines. What would differ in most cases is the amount of energy, and we take the average amount of energy for all age, sex groups to calculate the diet according to an energy content on average for the total population. So that's how we have one cost of a healthy diet. That's an average. So yeah, that's a technical question, but I think there are a lot of opportunities here that have been mentioned for how to start engaging with different stakeholders. So I know we're at time, and Rachel has put a survey form for your feedback. But I think it's definitely worth, you know, if anyone has some final comments right now or in the chat box, or to be in touch by email of actually, you know, how do we keep this ball rolling? How we had a long gap since our last time together 4 years ago. How do we start to talk about this metric, you know, being taken up in Tanzania, which is, you know, starting to happen at the global level. So how to really make it the most useful within Tanzania, not to have just a national figure, but to have these subnational figures and action points and linkages to extension and to private sector and to people who are engaging with consumers as well. We'd love to hear more about, you know, what should we do right now to help support the use of this information in Tanzania in many of the ways you've suggested.
And Anna, I'm just going to jump in really quickly to say that this is a huge part of my job, is to be helpful in scaling up the use of the metrics. If there's anything that is truly what I'm here for, that's why I'm on the Food Prices for Nutrition project. So I'm really excited to engage with you. Of course, Anna and others from our team will be involved as well. But please feel free to reach out to me directly. I put my email in the chat, and I'm really excited to talk to you. I might follow up with some of you individually as well. Please, of course, share now as well. But yeah, our goal is really to scale up the use of the metrics and help in any way that we can if there's people who are interested in using the cost of a healthy diet. So we're very excited, and that is what I'm here for. So please do reach out. I think I will stop recording and sharing, but if anyone has any last thoughts, that would be great. And if not,
I think we close now.
I think Joyce, you may have some final thoughts.
A request for Rachel, if she could come up with a policy brief. Now, I mean a stamp size policy brief, if that's possible. Stamp size, which actually something that can be used in this advocacy. If we want to engage with these people, we need to show them something. So that would be something quite useful right away, a policy brief that can be shared around. General one, consumable by everybody, so that at the end of the day, they're aware, because we have to create awareness, first of all. These are new indices. So awareness about indices. What do these indices do? What do they tell us? How can we use them? At the end of the day, how can we improve nutrition situation by using these indices? I think this is what people really want to hear, because we are struggling with stunting. Now we have obesity and overweight. I don't know whether these indices can actually be used to address overweight and obesity, so that, you know, we get this information out there, people are aware, and then we can now come up with serious engagement, like holding meetings or webinar like this one with private sector, with government officials, so that they are aware of what is going on, and task them, call to action as to what they need to do in order to make use of these indices. So this is what I would say for now. And we have already discussed a lot, and a lot of ideas have come up, and I hope they've been captured in the recording, and someone will do the decoding and tell us what it's all about it. And thank you all for coming, for those who are still with us, and Anna and Rachel for putting this together. It has been very interesting and insightful and useful indeed for many of us, and reminded us that job not done yet. We still have to continue with this one. And so I would like to wish everybody a good day for those who have just woken up, and good evening for those who are planning to go to sleep. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.